Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Farrell, the Worldwide Executive Director for Humanities Team, and I'm super excited to be here with you for this 90-minute program called Trauma, Karma, and Collective Wisdom, exploring the leading edge of healing. This online event is with acclaimed spiritual healer Thomas Hubl. As I mentioned, this is a 90-minute program, 60 minutes with Thomas Hubl and me, and then I will be doing a 30-minute live Q&A at the end. So be sure to make note of any questions that you might have for the end of the program. This program is part of a special webinar series that's called The Keys to Healing Trauma, Accessing Your Capacity to Transcend Personal and Intergenerational Traumas, that also features a free online event with Joan Borisenko. And thanks so much for joining us. We've got a really powerful program in store for you. As we get started, I'm going to give Thomas a proper introduction. Thomas Hubl was born in Vienna, Austria, and studied medicine for several years before abandoning his studies to spend 4 years in retreat, devoting himself to meditation and leading to a fundamental and revelatory opening. In the years since then, Thomas has become known internationally as a modern mystic and spiritual teacher whose work integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions with the discoveries of contemporary science, illuminating both with his profound understanding. He is the founder of the Academy of Inner Science, a unique institution utilizing a distinctive approach to exploring consciousness, evolution, and the junctures between mysticism and science. Since 2004, Thomas has maintained an active schedule of speaking, teaching, and training people from all walks of life. He lives in Tel Aviv and Germany with his wife and their daughter. And welcome to the program, Thomas. Great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I'm very happy that we're doing this together.
All right, me too. Been looking forward to this. And before we dive in with Thomas, I want to also let you know that near the end of this program, we're going to be telling you about a brand new 8-week master's program that we've been working on for over a year. It features Thomas Hubl and Joan Borisenko and draws on their leading edge of research and discovery. It is groundbreaking, as you will see, and more on that later. Now, let's jump right in with Thomas to get to these exciting topics that we've planned for you during the hour. And so Thomas, can you talk to me about the nature of personal trauma as we get started?
Well, let's start, first of all, say that trauma, like often when we hear trauma, we think of a car accident, or we hear whatever, like something that's connected to an event that happens to us. And maybe we define trauma for our conversation as the internal response to an overwhelming situation. So it means that life is actually very intelligent. And life over the course of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years learned that when there are overwhelming impacts, how to deal with those impacts in a way so that the survival is more secured, and that maybe staying in a place of action and choice. So when there is an overwhelming situation, an impact that cannot be processed in that moment, we have the capacity to, in a way, split off a part of our the overloaded part of our nervous system, in order for the rest of our nervous system to be in a functional place. But of course, that's only a short-term solution in a way, because it has consequences. But in that moment, it's a very intelligent choice. So there is a choice that's being made, and that's a very important point. And secondly, the after effects always go back to an intelligent action. Because often we see or we feel in our life the suffering that comes from trauma. We feel the after effects, that we are easily triggered, that we are easily stressed, that we find certain parts of our lives, certain situations, certain people, certain global issues as very difficult or problematic. Sometimes we feel disembodied or we feel numb because there's one part in our nervous system that gets shut down and another part is very stressed. So we feel that overactivation and we feel also the numbness. That's why it's hard for us to relate to certain situations. So trauma also limits our capacity to relate to ourselves and to life around us. And that's often very kind of difficult for us. We call it difficult, but we are suffering. And so in the last decades, I think trauma science, in a way, starts to reveal more the kind of physiological and the neuroscience aspects, the impacts on our bodies, on our health, on our ways of creating society. And later we're going to talk about a bit about a collective dimension of trauma. So, but in the ancient wisdom traditions, you know, when we talk about karma, one part of karma equals trauma. And so it's very interesting that it didn't start only now. Like people who were deeply concerned with life and exploring the depth of life, in a way, kind of revealed the nature of trauma already thousands of years ago. And also many civilizations or cultures tried to find healing modalities in order to deal with the after effects of trauma. So it's something that is kind of deeply ingrained in human history. And it comes with a feeling of separation, of feeling removed, of feeling kind of fragmented, holding back, being overreactive. And it's a big thing in our life when we, as long as we don't know what it's related to, we just see the symptoms. But once we are more trauma informed and we start to kind of track the roots of shock trauma, of attachment trauma that happens in many attachment processes between parents and their children, of course, through abuse, violence, and then transgenerational trauma and cultural trauma. And I believe that in a serious spiritual practice and in a serious human development process, I believe to be able to know about, learn to integrate and heal and transcend the traumatization that we personally carry or we carry in a larger context within us is very important. So that's why we made it also at least one more key element of our conversation and of our mutual exploration in general.
Yeah, boy, what a good place to start. That really sets the table here as we go down deeper now into this conversation. And you mentioned you brought in the collective dimension. You said, well, let's get to that in a little bit. So as we talk about then the collective dimension to trauma, sometimes that people are born into, how does that work?
Yeah, so my I think I'm running groups now worldwide, and I think it started 17 years ago or something like that. And then, of course, at the beginning, my group started off in Europe, mainly also in Germany, and there was something, and I wasn't really looking out for collective trauma, although I mean it's apparent that in Germany there is a big wound that is very recent in history, and it also turned out that in many of my groups that were pretty fast, kind of large groups, I had often these massive eruptions of many people within the group. Like often it happened after the third, fourth, fifth day of a retreat, that this massive eruption of collective unconscious material started to happen. And that the first time I saw it, it was wow, it was a big thing. It took us 2 or 3 days to process through it. And then after some time, because he came back again and again, of course I said, okay, so life is showing me something, and I started to study that. And then it led me to work, Holocaust work, between, like, in Germany, and then also Germany and Israel, and I ran retreats in Israel, and then we expanded it to the US and other places around the world. Because through all those retreats, I learned, wow, so we are talking about individual trauma, but actually in many places around the world, there are massive collective scars in the collective body that are not only, they are individual traumatizations, but there is also like a commonality. There is something in the experience of a whole culture going through a war, going through a dictatorship, going through genocide and violence, that there is a shared dimension, there's a cultural dimension of trauma. And often those impacts are so strong, like, for example, what's happening right now in Syria is a very deep cultural trauma that is happening right now as we speak. And so that's gonna take generations to be digested. And digestion is actually a very important word here, because a lot of the spiritual practice is to digest the undigested part of life. Karma is postponed energy, it's postponed experience, it's postponed information. And so we push some part of life, we cannot process it, so we push it out of the screen. But one day it will need to come back, and it will need to be processed, because it's energy that has been created. And when it's been created, it needs to fulfill itself, like the Enzo in the Zen tradition, until it returns into nothing, back into peace. So presence is isness. Presence is. It's being, people call it being in the moment, but it's more than being just in this moment in time. It's being deeply present, means to be able to be. Undigested information are thoughts, feelings, body sensations, inner processes that overshadow presence. And that's why many people don't feel like resting in a state of inner peace. And that inner peace, that capacity to really be quiet and still and tranquil and be nourished in a very deep, deep place inside, for many people got lost. And so we are trying to find answers in more superficial places within ourselves that are more fragmented. That's why we walk around with a lot of questions. And so then I realized, wow, for the spiritual practice, it's very important to see that there is not only individual trauma, but there's a collective dimension. And many people that have been born after such a collective scar or wound happened, we have been born into a world that is already very traumatized, which means that world for us is the world. The traumatized world seems to be normal, because many of the symptoms that we see, we grew up in, we deeply carry inside, epigenetically, psychologically, like socially. We have been imprinted by a world that is hurt. But not all the symptoms that we see, we call a wound. And I believe it's like walking around with a big inflammation, and then all the time wonder, or with a big wound, and then we all the time ask, oh, why do I constantly have inflammations? Yeah, but if we don't know that a wound needs to be treated as a wound, and it needs to be, you need to put band-aids, or you need to cover a wound in order not to get inflamed all the time, that if we don't do that, we will constantly have infections, and maybe some of them can be really severe. And I believe collective trauma, for many people that have been born after those catastrophes, we see social symptoms, political symptoms, health symptoms, all kinds of symptoms in the world that look like, oh, that's the world. That the massive degree of separation, because enlightenment is the return to the natural state, not to the extraordinary. Unification is the most underlying state. But because we know the fragmented world, our nervous systems grew up in fragmented worlds, more or less fragmented worlds. So we learned that that's the world, how it is. And I believe, so there's a much bigger ghost in the room, which is the collective ghost. And if that's the ghost of slavery, or of the Native American genocide, or if that's the Holocaust, or if it's the dictatorships or other genocides or wars, we find them all around the world. So the planetary body has lots of scars. And I believe individual traumatization goes most of the time back to a whole trauma net that is transmitted throughout the generations. And also science shows more and more how epigenetic changes happen through trauma and how trauma is being passed on. And that's also what the traditions, the wisdom traditions say. And I believe healing is going to go to a much wider collective level now, also because now we have technology, we became a global village. And I think there are many signs at the moment that we have to deal with the collective dimension of trauma in order to solve certain issues, like, for example, climate change. So I think it's a very, very important topic, and it's actually the threshold into a new, more collective we-space healing that we need to develop tools for. And I think it's upon us to hear this call and to be part of its development.
Yes, it is. Boy, when you went down the list of collective trauma, I would imagine all of us have at least one item in there. You know, as you bring in, for example, indigenous, these experiences that with indigenous people and lands such as the United States and elsewhere in the world, but also many other things that have been very traumatic collectively. One of the things that you touched on there, Thomas, was you were talking about the challenge in being present, being able to. So as we try and increase our capacity to be present in the moment when there are these kinds of trauma things going on, how can we do that? How can we increase our capacity here?
Yeah, one thing, like what I said before, sounds of course very dramatic, and it also is, because I think humans inflict a lot of harm onto humans, and but we also carry the remedy inside of us, because trauma is often inflicted through inappropriate relation, and the remedy to trauma is appropriate relation. And relating is something that everyone carries inside. Sometimes it's hurt, sometimes it's less hurt, but it's definitely something that is very, very deeply imprinted in our being, and it's something that we can learn, we can train, we can practice. So relation is one part that helps us to digest trauma and become more present. Then an inner practice of presence, meditation, contemplation, prayer, yoga, tai chi. There are many, many practices that help us to increase our sense of embodiment, because trauma usually shuts down parts of our embodiment, and that's why we feel less embodied. So we need to do trauma healing and trauma integration, but also really practice body-oriented practices to feel more grounded, to feel that, like in the Bible, there's a gospel that says, and like God and the word says light, and I'm paraphrasing this now. It's within a longer paragraph, and the word becomes flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very important sentence. It shows that the word as creation manifests itself through us and becomes matter. And that's also what it means to walk one's talk. And trauma fragments the mental, the emotional, and the physical experience. And through communication practices, we developed a tool that's called transparent communication, where we pay much more attention to the relational dynamic. And we see that actually in a lot of communication, there is some fragmentation that's being communicated. And when we communicated two-ness or fragmentation, it already sends out a symptom into the world. And that's why we often get entangled in relational dynamics, in behavior patterns, in unconscious dynamics. And so when we practice meditation, contemplation, and prayer, when we practice relational practices, we actually help ourselves to digest and more integrate trauma, especially when we do it with people that are like skilled in when more difficult trauma, we need specialists or professionals, of course. And then, but we also need a community that is more trauma informed, so that there is a collective capacity, and then there is, of course, a professional capacity. And I believe we need both. And so presence is the capacity to be in the very moment where we are. But it's not just the moment. Many people mix it with the moment in time. It goes beyond time. It's when the timeless and time meet. So the eternal moment and this moment become not two. So that's a bit different than in that I'm present with you right now. So that's a part of it. But in the mystical moment has a much deeper depth dimension. And so often why we are not present is because we have a lot of undigested energy in us. And that energy gets often fed by more undigested moments. I often say when it snows and there is a river, and when the snowflakes fall into water, they melt and they become water. When the snowflakes fall on ice, they accumulate and you have more and more snow on the ice. So when new experiences meet our trauma, which is ice, frozen life, so they are difficult moments or problems, and it piles up. So undigested energy has more undigested energy, more undigested energy. And so for people who do inner work, we actually support each other to digest and integrate that undigested energy so that there is more water. And water is flow, like in the Tao Te Ching. We become one with the Tao, which is the flow of life. And so presence is being practiced and trained in a way through contemplative practices, but it's also, and especially when we live in culture, it's also being trained through integration work and shadow work, because that also makes us more present, because we carry less undigested packages and luggages with us. So we travel lightly. And when you travel lightly, you're less exhausted.
Yeah, makes sense. So, and you brought in here karma and undigested experiences. So Can you share with me how do we integrate karma and undigested experiences of the past?
Yeah, so I think that's especially important in our time, because the very technology that we use right now, most of the people run around with smartphones. And so we are actually the whole time online. And the technology speeds up life, which on the one hand is a very good thing, of course, because it speeds up learning, it speeds up innovation, creativity, global information. So fantastic. On the other hand, like trauma is frozen life. And if it's frozen and there's more pressure through the speed of data, it creates more stress. And then we hear also from a wider global sphere about trauma. Many people get their news feeds on their phones, and you hear about the terror attack here and the school shooting there. So there's a lot of trauma information traveling with the same speed of data through the internet, like the learning, and it meets trauma in us. So that creates stress, 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 stress. And so I believe for all of us, having a contemplative practice, it looks like I take 30 minutes in the morning and I just sit and listen. But for many people, especially beginners, the beginning of the meditation practice is actually a digestion process. It's a process to allow information to come up, to be felt, and to move through. Many people say, when I sit at the beginning of a meditation practice, they say I sit, but it's everything else than quiet. And I try to concentrate on my breath. After 2 times, I'm already thinking about what I have to do afterwards. And so in order to be able to kind of concentrate energy, ground energy, and let our mind become still, that's a practice, but it needs also that first some of the charge of the battery can discharge itself. So often when we sit, for example, we are processing karma. We call it disturbance because our mind says, oh, I want to have a beautiful meditation experience. But actually, there's a detox process happening that detoxes physical, emotional, and mental charge. And often when people go onto meditation retreats for a longer time, we see the first days are more busy, but then slowly, slowly, the mud, the sediments start to settle, and suddenly the water gets clearer, and it's more quiet, it's more present, it becomes deeper, there's a depth dimension to us. And so what I'm saying is, I think especially in our time, and that's why I think the mindfulness movement also and the meditation practice gains so much traction, because many people intuitively feel we need to balance the speed of life by what I call being a gardener of inner space. Like that the cultivation of inner space is crucial, like inner spaciousness, witnessing capacity, the capacity to rest, in order to digest, to process karma, and in order to expand the inner dimension of spaciousness. And for people who practice that, we even did once with our first training an fMRI study where 20 of the students of a training program and myself, we went into fMRI, brain scan, and we looked at the meditation experience. And so some of the students of that group got tested, and some of them were beginners, some of them were experienced meditators, and you could see the difference in the fMRI. And you could also see that after 1 year of regular practice, there was a significant improvement for the beginners. And you could also see the difference between experienced meditators and beginners. So that's very interesting, but it's also very promising that digesting karma leads to deeper presence. And of course, the other way to integrate karma is a meaningful community that creates a healing environment. And we do a skillful shadow integration work, a skillful trauma work, like a skillful integration work that helps us in a different way to integrate karma. And I think if we find more and more communities, and we do find more and more communities around the world, it really creates spaces for that. I think that's a very, very helpful and powerful mechanism to integrate karma.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And gardeners for our inner space, our inner sanctuary. Beautiful. So Thomas, how can we transform our trauma triggers into signposts for growth and development?
Yeah, first, already with that question, if I see that trauma triggers, that every time I say, oh, I had a difficult situation, or I have a problem in my life, and I'm willing to see that what I call difficult or problem is part of a teaching experience. It's part of a learning experience. Because often when we meet something that is difficult, we kind of want to get it out of our life. But for more experienced practitioners, we want to get it actually into our life, because the nature of the unconscious and trauma is that we can't see directly. Because it's shut down and dissociated, it means I cannot experience it subjectively directly. I see it through symptoms, and I often see it through the feedback that I get from life. That information comes back to me that shows me potentially very proximately my trauma or my shadow parts are. So life tells me anyway. And if I'm willing to listen, then I say, oh, there's a difficult situation in my life, and I want to find out more about it. And the thing is that if I have here an obstacle in my life, and I want to go from here, there. So often we think, oh, whatever it is, if it's something in my personal life, or if it's a great project or a climate change project that I want to bring into the world, and then I meet the obstacle, I want to get I see this should be out, because without this, it would be much better, because I get faster to my aim. Where in fact the mystical teaching says, no, this is not in the way, this is the way. And that's a fundamental difference. If I see my difficulties are not blocking my way, the fact that they are there means they have to be there. And they are the way, which means they need my full attention. I want to find out something about it. I'm curious. I examine my inner state. When I say I had a difficult team meeting, or I had a difficult interview, or I had a difficult conversation with somebody, that I find out what in myself I call difficult. What's the experience underneath this word? And I will always find out that the difficulty is a deeper, most probably emotional or dissociated experience that I cannot fully experience. That's why I call the situation difficult. I'm looking through the difficulty onto the situation. And so life in the difficult moment shows me my potential for expansion, my potential for wisdom and learning, and my potential for growth. And so if I'm interested in those moments, then I will start to engage my energy and my intelligence to resolve it. And why is that so important? Because we have a tendency, I think one of the collective trauma symptoms is that we split life into strengths and difficulties or weaknesses. So there are my strengths and then there are my weaknesses. And I believe that even in many assessment tools, it seems like developed that we can speak about our weaknesses, which is already very good. It's better than to hide them. And still the framing, I don't find very helpful, because often when we have weaknesses, even if it's very conscious to be able to talk about them, still there is often underneath an unconscious attempt to get rid of them. But the difficulty is not with the weakness. I think it's more in our capacity to relate. That the weakness is a childhood hero that is not being heard. The weakness is always a childhood hero that's not being heard. And so it's more in our capacity to relate that we simply often don't hear the more mute communication that is underneath the surface. And so, for example, if there is a violent home, like there's a violence in the family, and children learn to make their energy invisible in order not to get hurt. So children that learn by being invisible, I will be less hurt, that's a very intelligent function. That's a childhood hero. That's an intelligence. To develop that is intelligent. Later on in life, then people are, I don't know, at university or they're looking for jobs and they say, yeah, but people always choose other people. They don't see me. I don't feel seen. When I go to groups, I don't find my place in groups. Or people don't see me. They want to do all the exercises with other people. They don't come up to me. Yeah, because if that coat of invisibility is still around us, then it creates, of course, symptoms. Trauma has after effects. But in the moment of its creation, it was an intelligent process. And if I examine the parts that I struggle with, and I'm looking for their intelligence, it's very different as if I'm looking at them as if they were deficiencies. They're not deficiencies, they're intelligent actions that can be changed if we find its and re-own its inherent intelligence. Because I created this. Nobody created this for me. And so once I know, wow, I am actually part of the invisibility, and with my creativity created it, I can change it. But if I externalize it as a problem, it's very hard for me to change it in my life because I don't own its original creativity. And I think that that's a very widespread function in society. And I think it goes up even to climate change, that we are looking, oh, why is society not changing faster? And so I believe that there are a lot of trauma symptoms, and trauma doesn't want to change. The nature of trauma is to be frozen. And so when we look at societal change processes, there are similar processes needed to identify what creates this symptom, to learn to listen, to learn to attune, to learn to listen to roots more than smoke and symptoms. And then I think we apply what the big masters of many wisdom traditions told us, that we are looking through the surface of life and we are looking into its depth. And in the depth, there is actually what creates the surface. And I believe presence and depth and inner kind of stillness and inner connectedness, these are all prerequisites to be able to listen to the origin of life, there where life is being created right now. And that's very powerful.
Yes, it is. Wow, you covered a lot there, Thomas. Beautiful. And I love that we're turning this whole thing around where we're viewing trauma triggers as obstructions. And you're saying they're not obstructions, they're actually drivers,
Mm-hmm.
drivers for growth. Beautiful. And you brought in so many other things there as well, just the whole aspect of balancing stillness, um, or making room for stillness in our daily living. So, so just beautiful, and you've covered so much here. I want to, I shared earlier that there was going to be a lot to digest here, and I think that you've put a lot on the table. So one of the things I want to share is we're going to send out tomorrow morning an email with a link to this webinar so that you can listen to it again, view it again if you like, because again, there's a lot to unpack that Thomas stepped through. So keep an eye out in your in email for a link to this webinar. Now, I also mentioned that we're going to be talking about a brand new program that we've been working on here for actually about a year. And I want to go ahead and segue over to that program. I'm going to share screen here in just a moment to tell you about the program. But first, I want to share that the way that this program came about is that Thomas was on a panel with Joan Borisenko, and they were talking about trauma, these very topics that we're getting to today here during today's program. And there was so much wisdom, so much vision, insight, really healing as that conversation ensued, that we said, wow, my God, there's really a beautiful and important transformational education program here. So I'm going to share a screen here in just a moment, but Thomas, you probably remember back to that panel that I'm talking about, and anything that you want to share just in regards to the inspiration that surfaced then that maybe we should develop a transformational education program here from this basis.
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned it already, that I think Joan and I got together and the first time on this panel, and there was a lot of mutuality. Even, we come from different backgrounds, and we came to that mutuality and that mutual interest from different backgrounds. But I think there was something very powerful in exploring those multifaceted approaches. And so I think that was the birth moment of the idea, wow, if there is a resonance, so why not to dive deeper into that resonance and see what we can give birth to together and address many of the important issues that she is passionate about and that I'm passionate about. And I think, yeah, here we see a great result. And of course, we have different approaches. We talk about it from different backgrounds, but I think that makes also the beauty of a kind of a holistic perspective.
So, and by the way, we really need a drum roll here or something because this is the very first unveiling of this program page. Here it is, Healing the Past, Discover the Tools to Heal Personal and Collective Trauma. So, and we've been talking about this for almost a year. So if I look excited, that's why, because this is the very first unveiling, and it's a brand new program. We're just super excited about it. Now I'm going to just a few things here as we get started. One is Thomas and I won't be able to do justice to describing the fullness of this program in the short time that we have. So want to just invite you to come back to this program page and really scroll it and meditate into it. to see if this is touching on any important things going on in your life, if there's an inner yes, so to speak, to the program. So, because there's a lot that is really powerful that's discussed from the top of the page down, and want to invite you to really read fully into all of what's here. Now, one thing that we're talking about as we're coming up on this program, Thomas, is the re-traumatizing thing that people are feeling. I'm based here in the United States, but it's not just in the United States; it's in other countries too, where with this whole nationalist populist thing that's going on, where we're stepping back from climate change. You've referenced that a few times. But also where other things are going on, there's income inequality and job training and all of these things that aren't really getting a lot of attention here in many countries, including the US. So this whole re-traumatizing thing that is that's going on, that's partly based in politics around the world. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. I mean, I think we need to discern what is re-traumatization and what is actually triggering a lot of discomfort in us, which is not yet a re-traumatization. But anyway, in both ways, we see, I believe that there is a lot of collective material at the moment being processed in the political sphere, in the social sphere, in the healthcare system, in the education system. So because I think the world's kind of speeding up in many ways, spiritually and technologically, which kind of go hand in hand. And I believe a lot, whenever there is like a speeding up of vibration or a speeding up of the speed of data, then the parts that are resisting that transmission of that speed they need to show up in our conscious awareness. And often people, like there are many mystics that had a deep awakening experience, and they had a very big opening, and afterwards they had a 6 months of depression. And because like a big consciousness opening might trigger a lot of individual and collective unconscious material to come up. And a similar version, of course not the same, but a similar thing I think is happening around the world at the moment. And I think we also see that there is a climate crisis already very close, and we are already feeling kind of the impact of that, which also brings up a lot of fears, a lot of kind of also intuitive knowing that some bigger changes are coming and that our societies won't stay the same. And I think all of that triggers a lot of trauma layers, as you said. But that's, in a way, if we really take it, so we transform that into growth. I think that's the chance that we have. And I think we really have to take that chance collectively, because we are dealing now with collective layers. We see that political systems are changing in many places, that more conservative voices want to secure our existence, but we can't secure our existence through separation. But that's the attempt, so that the energy narrows down and they say, okay, I save myself. But we won't save ourselves by being more separate. I think we need to really allow what's coming up and see how we can keep a kind of a global awareness while living locally and sustainably, and transform those triggers, and actually see that climate change in a way also starts with every one of us. Because if I cannot live a sustainable life within myself, and sustainability has many layers, but if I burn my own life energy, so I'm actually, because my body is the closest part of nature, then I'm actually not living a sustainable life, and I'm co-creating climate change just by my way of living, the way how I deal with my life energy. So finding a more conscious approach in myself is also like a big contribution to one of the topics that we see right now in the world. And also, I believe, finding a relation to certain political activities, to social activities, instead of just blaming and talking badly about them, is also an important step, and see how I can transform my own creativity into what I'm for and how I want to create and contribute to a world, a better world. And I think there are just a few. Of course, as you said, we won't talk about all of this in depth now, but I think there are just a few aspects of it.
Yeah, wonderful. And the individual and collective are so intertwined, as you're mentioning, even when we talk about things like climate change. So I'm going to go ahead and just start scrolling this page. You can see, so healing the past, discover the tools to heal personal and collective trauma. And this is an 8-week program, master's program. It's a brand new program. We've been working on it for almost a year. It's with Thomas Hubl and Joan Borisenko. And by the way, when we get down to the bottom and I show you all of what's in here, the 8-week program, the 8 modules from Thomas, the 8 modules from Joan, the 4 mentoring sessions that are all live, the bonus programs and so on, and then the price, I think you'll be surprised in a positive way. We're a nonprofit. Humanities Team is a nonprofit. So our primary mission is to reach and touch and impact as many people around the world as we can to create healing and to create the possibility for us to come together consciously on this journey to create, homes, communities, states, countries, a world, the earth that is that's conscious. So that's the whole reason that Humanities Team is here, and we're real excited about this program because we feel like right at this time in the earth or world's evolution, there is so much. There's trauma that's surfacing, anxiousness, anxiety. A lot of words that we could put to it, but we think the timing on this program is important. That this is a wonderful time to bring forward a program such as this. So I'm going to just read a few things here. I'm not going to try and read this whole page, but it says an empowering new approach to transforming traumatic experiences into opportunities for growth, which is what Thomas has been emphasizing. Don't let the past hold you back from being fully in the present ever again. So that's what we're getting to here. Again, I'm not going to try and read this. This is where we're inviting you to come back and read about this 8-week master's program yourself. But I do want to scroll down to Thomas's program here, his module, so you can real briefly talk to these. He is this is organized as an 8-week program, and the first 8 modules are Thomas's modules, and then Joan Borisenko comes behind Thomas with her 8 modules. So Thomas, is there anything you want to share just about your 8 modules as we're scrolling the page here?
Yeah, you see, we start with stillness and movement because stillness is the presence that we already talked about. It's the depth dimension, the timelessness. It's the place inside to go deeply, let's say, back into our source. And from stillness, movement is born. Movement is the eternal changing universe. And I think that stillness and movement are 2 forces, especially for us. We are living in culture, so we are living immersed in the creative movement. And many of us feel a drive to contribute something meaningful to society, to each other. As you said, like the Humanities Team wants to make a contribution to a better world, to a more conscious world. So that's creativity, and all your activities are movement. Like the creativity drives us. It makes us create new things, lets us be innovative. And that's a beautiful force. So stillness and movement are both non-dual. So it's not either stillness or movement, it's the stillness within the movement and the movement within the stillness. that's the non-dual realization. So we're going to talk about those two principles because they are super important. They are the basis of many, many of our experiences in our life. And then, of course, we talk about relational intelligence. We said how important it is that there are many things we can do to expand our relational intelligence. And the relational intelligence is one of the major resources in order to deal with trauma. And third module is about the nature of trauma. We will explore deeper what is the nature of trauma, how does it express itself in our life. And then in module 4, we talk about healing trauma. What can I do? What can we do in order to really, you know, apply practices and tools and also community tools. How can I be part of a meaningful community that supports me and I support in the healing of trauma? And then we talk about embodiment, because I think embodiment is a very important part in the spiritual practice. We're not trying to get away from experience into some kind of space beyond, but we are really coming into the experience and then transcend it. And I think embodiment is a big part because it makes us walk our talk, and how that's part of the spiritual practice. And then we will explore more in depth also what's collective trauma, what did I learn about collective trauma so far, and why I think it's an important topic to deal with, and how it informs maybe also the next level of our healing practices and our kind of more collective healing tools that we can develop and what they might be. And then we are talking also about the mystical dimension of restoration. What's restoration when we look at it from a deeper mystical and energetic point of view, and how is that true in my own personal life, and how is that true on a more collective level? The principle of restoration is very powerful. Yeah, so I think those are the 6 modules, and I believe that there we also put into the course a lot of bonus materials and meditations and journeys how to put this into practice in ourselves.
Yes, we did. So these are the 8 modules here from Thomas that we've just talked down through. And then there are the 8 modules from Joan Borisenko that follow. And there's another program that you're registered for where with Joan we'll go through her 8 modules in some depth. The Child Within, Calm and Open, Retrain Your Brain, Quiet the Self-Critic, Transgenerational Healing, The Power of Story, Positive Psychology, and Relational Intelligence. And the beautiful thing here is Joan, you may know, has her own, very unique experiences coming into this work. She was a instructor at Harvard Medical School and has 3 PhDs from Harvard. When she was tapped on the shoulder, so to speak, there were family experiences that were going on that caused her to leave that work at Harvard and to come over into this mind-body work, where she is, just like Thomas, a huge pioneer in this area, somebody who's brought so much wisdom to mind-body healing and to healing trauma. So you'll enjoy the program here with Joan as well. Now, then in addition to these 16 modules, and we send out 2 modules a week during this 8-week program. So the 8-week program, 2 modules a week. And then interspersed in there, the first 4 weeks are with Thomas, and Thomas is doing 2 live mentoring programs during his 4-week program. And then during Joan's 4-week program, she's doing 2 live mentoring programs. And one of the most powerful things in these programs that we offer is the transfer, is the mentoring, where they're coming in live. This program is on something called Zoom webinar, where you can see us, but we can't see you. When we do the mentoring, we use Zoom programs. So people can raise their hand and they're coming on camera, and they're going through in Thomas's material, and they come on camera with Thomas to say, hey, I really, enjoyed these modules. I've got these questions or these comments, or I've been turning this in my mind. Can you give me some feedback or things I might want to consider here as I'm working on this particular concept of yours? So the mentoring is real powerful. And again, there are 2 of these 60-minute live mentoring programs with Thomas, and then 2 live mentoring programs with Joan. There's a Facebook community where during the 8 weeks and beyond, we never take the Facebook communities down. So there's interaction actually in those Facebook communities out forever, but it's extremely active during the 8 weeks that the program's going on. MP3 audios during the modules. Now, Thomas was bringing in the bonus collections. The bonuses, you'll see when I get down to the value creation here. Honestly, the whole program's $297. I'm going to just jump to that right now. You'll see that. That's the discounted price of the program. And the bonuses are worth $297 alone, as I think you'll see. Let me take you through them here real quick. There are 2 different bonus collections. The first one is for early registration. So where you register by July 5th, then this bonus collection kicks in. There are 3 bonuses in this category that are called spiritual health, is what this category is called, spiritual health. And the first bonus is our 4 videos by Thomas. One is how spiritual band-aids fail us. 2 is the nervous system as the messenger of the law. Video 3 is how to listen to our inner guidance. And 4 is staying centered in a tech-driven world. Then bonus number 2 is a mind-body connection. It's an audio seminar on mind-body connection by Joan Borisenko. So it's a 60-minute audio program on exploring the role of meaning and spirituality as an integral part of health and healing. So that's bonus 2. And then bonus 3 is this karma-free living 30-minute video by Thomas Hubl. I'm not going to try, and we don't have the time to read all these descriptions. This is why we're inviting you to come back and really read this carefully to understand fully what is in this program. Here's what it nets down to is a part of this program, these 8 video modules with Thomas Hubl, again, that we're feeding out 2 a week for 4 weeks, and then 8 video modules from Joan Borisenko, 16 MP3 audios, 4 live mentoring sessions, the Facebook community participation, and then all of the bonuses, and it's $297. So we're pretty excited about that. And again, we think this is an important time to bring out a program like this. We're the only nonprofit that's in this transformational education space. There are 4 big for-profits. We identified this as something that really needs attention, trauma, because there's a lot of trauma in most of our backgrounds, and there's a lot of collective trauma out there too. And it's kind of, with all of the things going on in the world, it's sort of stirring the pot, bringing this trauma to the surface. And as Thomas is mentioning here, there's the opportunity to transform, to go from obstacles, where Thomas is talking about how it holds us back, to drivers for our growth and drivers for our conscious evolution journey, which is what's necessary now, isn't it? If we're going to create, if we're serious about creating this new way of living, flourishing in our own life, flourishing communities, flourishing countries, and a flourishing world ultimately. So that's what we've got here. We're real excited about it. Been working on it for over a year. This is the very first unveiling. Thomas, anything you want to share here as we're putting a wrap on this program? I'm about to come over to do live Q&A with you, but
what I want to share is I really enjoy also to feel your passion, and that I feel your drive and your contribution, that it's really meaningful to you as well, to, like you know, you and your organization to do this, and other things that you do. I mean, you do so many things, and I want to thank you for what you're contributing here as well, and also that you really invited us and that you made this happen. So I want everybody to know this and to enjoy your passion as well. And I think, as you said, I think there are many important topics that we covered within this course, and it's, of course, it's a course that shows us a much wider landscape in our own life, and also gives us tools, or gives us kind of a direction how to take care of it, how to work it creatively, and how to, you know, I often say, like, mature practitioners, you recognize when you see that they stop asking how long it's going to take and how much more shadow work they need to do and how many hours they still need to sit until they get enlightened. So, and once we drop those questions, we can say we are really walking the path. And I think if, like, trauma is something that we float on top of, and it often doesn't allow us to really sink deeply into life, and also to become a mature practitioner that is simply on the path, and life is our path. And that's why I think if we can explore such a journey together, and if we also see the value of the community, that the community becomes like a kind of a healing whatever vessel, and that third side of space is a very powerful element of a course too, that many people are studying something together, that they come online together, they listen to each other together. So it's like online classes are like a whole experience, because we create them together, and we also create collective wisdom together. So I think there are many beautiful aspects to such a journey.
Yes, there are, beautiful, and it really important right now, especially as we're at this, sometimes we call this our decision point moment on the earth, where there's so much really that we need to decide individually and collectively. So, and I just want to say it's been such a pleasure, Thomas, partnering with you and your organization. You're, as you know, you're a really important spiritual and mystical pioneer out in the world. You do, you know, leading edge research, leading edge work, and it's such a privilege and pleasure for us to be partnering with you and to bring your body of work to our community. So so thank you for being here. Thanks for being part of this program, and we think we're offering something of great value really to our community as we unveil this this amazing program. Healing the Past is kind of the short name for the program. So come back and check out the page. When I come over to the live Q&A, I'll share the dates and times for these live mentoring programs, the two with Thomas and the two with Joan. So stay tuned. And thank you all for joining us here.